Welcome to the Living to 100 Club podcast.
Well, hello to everyone joining us today on our podcast. You're listening to one of our successful aging episodes this month on the Living to 100 program, and I'm your host, Joe Casciani. Each week, our conversations educate and inspire, helping you get the best out of all the years we're given, regardless of what obstacles come our way. You can learn more about our club at our website, and be sure to take a look at my new training and activities manual called Better, Longer, and Happier, a guide to aging with purpose and positivity. This is a series of 12 modules in a card deck format, developed for activities directors at senior living communities to learn about psychologically healthy aging. These modules help to engage senior residents in activities that are cognitively challenging and foster a positive mindset. Module 1 is now on sale. Visit our website, livingto100.club/BLH. Now on to today's program. On today's podcast, we invite Frances Woolley as our guest. Dr. Woolley is an economist at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. She is an authority on challenges ahead as the baby boomer generation contemplates the risk of needing long-term care. We discuss the demands on healthcare systems as our population ages, the shortage of long-term care beds, and the inequities in paying for this care. As families now make huge sacrifices in caring for a spouse or a parent with little or no outside help, eventually this care shifts to a state here in the U.S. or a provincial system in Canada that may be fragmented and inequitable. Can the infrastructure keep up with the improvements needed, considering constantly changing decision makers and uneven political influence? How should the risk of needing long-term care be shared among individuals, families, and governments? Is it possible to raise public funds to face the looming crisis as the need for dementia beds mushrooms? First, a little background. Frances Woolley is a professor of economics at Carleton University, where she's taught since 1990. Her research centers on families and public policy. Dr. Woolley's most cited work is on modeling family decision-making, measuring inequality within the household, feminist economics, and tax benefit policy towards families. Recently, she spent more time researching the provision and financing of long-term care, inspired in part by the challenges her family faced when her father needed care at the start of the COVID pandemic. Frances' true passion is using economics to explain everyday experience and in sharing her love of economics with her students. She served as secretary-treasurer and also president of the Canadian Economics Association, co-editor of the Canadian Tax Journal and the Review of Economics of the Household, and as Associate Dean of the Faculty of Public Affairs at Carleton University. Frances holds a BA from Simon Fraser University, an MA from Queen's, and a PhD from the London School of Economics. Dr. Woolley, welcome to our program today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. I'm looking forward to our conversation. This is a thought-provoking topic. I always like to open by asking our guests to tell us a little bit about the journey that brought you to where you are today. I covered a bit of your background, but what are some of maybe the milestones that took you to where you are today?
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, in terms of the long-term care, I'd like to pick up on that part of it, how you were saying about, how my father needing care made me really start more interested in researching this area. And for a long time, I just found the prospect of long-term care just too scary to think about. It was just so awful, I couldn't think about it. And then when my dad needed care, you know, we dealt with it. And, when you start dealing with it, when you get down to it, it became much easier to write about it and do research about it because it was tough. It wasn't easy, but having had experience, it wasn't this kind of fear of the unknown. So that's kind of what brought me to here.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so professionally or, in your academic world, you were close to it, but not as immersed as you were when you were dealing with it on a personal level.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And people say that the personal is political. I mean, um, for me, I'm in a incredibly privileged position to be a university professor and able to do research. And to me, having that privilege, you're really responsible to do research that matters to people and answer the questions that matter to people. And I think right now, long-term care is one of the issues that matters the most from a public policy perspective. And it doesn't get the attention because it's scary. We don't want to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's take a deeper dive into that. When you've told me in an earlier call when we had our conversation that the whole demographics, aging, the boomer population is going to strain the healthcare systems in developed countries like the U.S. and Canada. Why is that? Why aren't we keeping up to meet the demand of the population growth?
Well, I think I would distinguish between healthcare and long-term care. I mean, what you're saying is true. There's issues with healthcare, but healthcare and long-term care are different. So healthcare is, all those things that kind of doctors provide for you. So, if you get sick, you need healthcare. Long-term care is more kind of help with the activity of daily living. So it's, you need help getting dressed. You need help, preparing your meals. You don't need a doctor for that. You don't need medical care for that. And it's not covered by Medicaid, right? So you've got the healthcare system, you've got the long-term care system. They're different. They're both in crisis. Okay. Now your question is, what is what's the cause of the crisis? Every country is different, and the United States is really very different when it comes to healthcare. My son and daughter-in-law live in the US, and my daughter-in-law is currently pregnant. And I'll tell you, if she was in Canada, she'd get a fraction of the tests, a fraction of the care that she's getting in the States.
Sure.
So, the US is the US, if you get good care in the US, you get the best care in the world. But not everybody gets that. In terms of why it's challenging is, people tend to need more, people are like cars. Like once you get a certain number of miles on the engine, stuff starts going wrong. And if you have an aging population, you've got more old cars on the road and they need more maintenance, and you don't have any more mechanics than you used to. In fact, you probably have fewer mechanics because your mechanics are retiring, and it's just that simple.
Well, yeah, and as you said, the healthcare system is different from long-term care, but a growing need for help with ADLs, activities of daily living, and shortage of these assisted living facilities. I mean, where I live here in Southern California, they're just building one after another of the independent and assisted ALFs. And the nursing home, I think that whole demographic is still there, but I think it's not growing as fast as the ADL, assisted living facilities is growing. So you're thinking that with the advancing age of the baby boomers, our populations, we're just not going to have the care available. We're not going to have the the systems
Well,
in place?
it's a matter of supply and demand. Um, if you've got money, you can get care,
Yes.
right? But if you just kind of do the math on what you need to provide assistance with the activity of daily living, especially when somebody has, say, dementia, right? Dementia is the really, and again, like it's back to like, this is a scary topic.
Yeah.
It's hard to think about it. Like dementia, that's the worst, right? That's the one thing we don't want to think about. So it's hard to even start having these conversations. But if we're thinking about dementia care, because that's the really, really tough one. Somebody's got dementia, they need a person there available to look after them 24 hours a day. If you're going to pay people a decent wage, that's going to be expensive. And there's just no real getting away from that, right? So, I mean, that talks to, so I think that there's just, the issue is there's just a certain amount that long-term care costs because it's, you need a place for people to live. You need people to look after them. And that just is expensive. You can't really do much to reduce the cost. Like it's not like we're going to get some, magic technology. There's just those costs are there. And I think the issue is really the issue with the shortage of spaces is a lot. It's to do with two things. The number one thing is there the funds available to pay those costs?
Right.
And if you don't have the money, if you don't invest the money, you're not going to get those facilities. And then the other thing is this, like in every place has specific issues, but there's issues with building housing everywhere, like with things like zoning and permitting and so on. But a lot of it just is like it's expensive, and who's going to pay for it?
Right. And you've said that it's kind of this black and white or all or nothing situation where you can either afford it privately, and if you can't, you go on to Medicaid. In California, it's Medi-Cal. So there's that big long stretch from the affordable care and the people that cannot afford it. So you're saying, even in Canada, I think you said that the systems cannot keep up with the demands, and the reimbursement for this care is still strained. I know in nursing homes, skilled nursing facilities, Medi-Cal barely covers the costs of the care. It barely covers. It's almost a break-even situation.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Medicare
and so, go ahead.
So like, why, around where I live, there's a lot of fancy for-profit facilities going in to cater to people who have money.
Yeah.
Because that's profitable. But building a home that is going to cater to Medi-Cal or Medicaid patients isn't profitable. Yeah. So people aren't doing it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is this, like a kind of a logistical thing, right? You need to get the money up front to build a facility before you start collecting revenues. And that's a big issue. Now, if you're like a big international company that runs profitable long-term care homes, then maybe you can get that capital up front. But if you're, say, a nonprofit organization or a municipal government or something like that, maybe even you want to build a nursing home. Maybe, you're a nonprofit association, you want to build a nursing home, you're prepared to, raise funds so that it works with Medi-Cal. Where are you going to get the money up front to build the home?
Right.
And that's a big issue.
Right.
And it's a political issue as well as a practical issue. Because a government doesn't, like if you're the governor of California, you put a whole bunch of funding into building new nursing homes. Those homes don't open until you're no longer in office. So you're not going to get the credit for this on the next election cycle. Right? So there's a
Yeah,
lot of practical problems here.
yeah, and the person who replaces the current governor may or may not have the same frame of mind, and there may
Mhm.
be changes in the funding, that whole apparatus. Yeah, yeah. So we've opened the Pandora's box here. How should
Yes.
we how should we be paying for long-term care?
Well, let's get back to cars, right? You have an older car, there's a risk it's going to break down. I don't know you. I drive my car's 9 years old. Not going to replace it anytime soon. Um, live in a cold climate here. I'm up here. There's snow on the ground here. Um, sometimes the car breaks down. So you know what I have? I have roadside insurance.
Hmm.
And so if the car breaks down, I'm going to call a number, going to get a tow truck. It's going to help me out. Okay. If I get in an accident, I've got a car insurance. That's going to help me out. Right. So with a lot of things, there's a lot of bad things that can happen to us in life. But for most of those bad things that we have in life, we have insurance.
Yeah.
We share those risks. Long-term care is one of the, needing a whole lot of long-term care at the end of your life. That's one of the biggest and most expensive risks that's one of the most expensive things that can happen to you in your life, right? Needing a lot of long-term care. And it's the one thing that we don't have insurance. We don't have a mechanism in place for sharing that risk unless, you're low income enough to qualify for Medicaid or Medi-Cal.
Mm.
And I'm talking here about the States as if it's we.
Yeah.
Other countries actually do. Countries don't do. There's no country that really does terrifically on this, but there's a lot of countries that share that risk more than is done in the States.
Hmm. Yeah. So we have insurance for all of these other risks that we do good risk management in other areas of our lives, but not so well in long-term care.
Yeah. And that is the fundamental question, right? How do we share this risk? We know that, we're all going to eat blueberries, we're going to exercise, we're going to get enough sleep, we're going to do everything we can to keep healthy and living to 100. But, some of us are going to be unlucky. Some of us have just got, we just
Yeah.
got unlucky with the gene pool or whatever. Some of us are going to need that care. And how do we share that risk?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we know living to 100 is not in the cards for everyone. We know
Yeah.
that.
Well, you know what? If I just drop down and of a heart attack,
Yeah. Yeah.
I could be like, live a good life, have a good
Yeah.
fun retirement, then drop dead of a heart attack. That wouldn't be too bad. It's that
Yeah.
it's not the not living, it's the prospect. As I said, this is a scary topic,
Yeah.
right? And this is something that scares me, the
Mhm.
idea of needing a lot of long-term care.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you refer to is flattening the curve where we're living healthy, and then we drop off and
We want to drop off a cliff.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
always figure
strong.
you need three things. You need a healthy mind, you need a healthy body, and you need enough money to get by. And if you've got all three, it's awesome.
Mm. Yeah.
But what you don't want is one of those to go while the other two are still functioning,
Yeah.
right?
So why can't families and home care agencies cover this need? I mean, we know there's a lot of outfits that will go
Okay.
into the home. Yeah.
Okay. So there's the who provides the care and who pays for the care. As I said, a lot of people are prepared to provide the care as long as you're willing to pay enough, right? You come and you put an ad in the paper and say, I'm going to have I'm prepared to pay $1,000 a day for somebody to come and look after me in my home and wipe my bum. You're going to get applicants.
Yeah.
It's the who provides the care, who finances the care. Different questions,
Mhm.
right? And if we're talking about, and the really tricky thing is who pays for it, right? And some people they will save up enough to pay for it, or their families will pay for it. But again, we're talking about sharing the risk. You know what? If I have a car accident tomorrow and I smash my car, yeah, I have enough money in my bank account to pay for the damage the car does and to buy a new one. But I don't want to drain my bank account. I want to share that risk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If we have families paying for long-term care, we aren't sharing that risk.
Yeah.
So how do we share the risk? Like, how do we, share the risk of paying for this care between families and between the community as a whole?
Mm-hmm. And one model we discussed is what's occurring in Australia. I'm not sure how
Yeah.
expanded it is, but the government is taking kind of a portion of the equity or the ownership of the home, kind of like
Yeah.
the reverse mortgage, but
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
owner or seller doesn't reap all of that. The
Yeah.
government takes a portion of it to cover future
Yeah.
costs. Is
Yeah.
that viable? That sounds
Yeah.
like a pretty innovative program.
Yeah. I mean, you were saying earlier about how long-term care in the States is kind of black and white, right? Either you qualify for Medicaid, Medi-Cal, and then you can get a space in a long-term care facility, or there's really, I mean, there's some, like I wouldn't say that there's none, but you're pretty, there's pretty limited support. Okay. Other countries are not like that. Okay. And Australia is one of those countries that's not like that. Now, there's a trade-off. The trade-off is that there's taxes in these other countries tend to be higher.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have higher levels of taxes, but those higher levels of taxes buy you assistance with providing long-term care. So say you're in Australia, you need a certain level of care. Okay, so you go and it's like there's a checklist. It's like, can you walk? Can you do this? How functional are you? Right? Are you like Joe here, who's leaping around having podcasts? Or you maybe not quite so like Joe. Maybe you can't, you're having problems working your computer or whatever. Right? So there's a checklist. You figure out, okay, how much care do you need? And there's like a statement, a set test that figures out how much care you need. Okay. If you need care, it's like, okay, you need care. There's some money that's going to come from the government out of general tax revenues that's going to pay for that care. So it kind of works more like Medicare, right? You're going to get, you need that care, you get it. But you're also going to need to provide some of the costs yourself. You're going to have to cover some of the costs yourself. And the amount that you pay, again, it's not black and white. We're going to say, okay, well, look at your assets. We don't want to like bankrupt your spouse or anything like that. We want your kids to still be able to inherit something. So we'll look at your assets. Some of those assets are going to need to go towards long-term care. Mm-hmm. So there's a sharing here, right? It's like, okay, this is your level of care. You're going to get some support from everybody in Australia, mm-hmm. works with the way Medicare works, yeah. And then some of this you're going to need to pay out of your own resources, mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So there's a sharing.
Sure. And how do the residents feel about that? I mean,
there is no place where people are happy with their long-term care system. But
that's a given then, right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But I would say that there's been, I would say it's a system that works well in many respects. Mm-hmm. I think the number one concern in Australia, and I think the number one concern everywhere with long-term care, is the systems need more money. Mm-hmm. Right? I think people are happy with the Australian system. They just need it. There needs to be, it's the same issue, not enough money for places, not enough money for home care that every system in the world has. But I would say it's at least got the bones there, mm-hmm. Right? But it's it's a big challenge. Like, how do we, who pays?
Yeah. Well, there's there's a lot of moving parts too, and the population is changing and getting healthier and all of that. But it sounds like, as you say, it's the bones are there, the structure is there, and it will need a lot of tweaking, a lot of shaping. How long has this been in place?
Oh, good question. There's a big reform, a big reform. I'm not sure it's within, but it's this century, right? It's not,
Mhm.
I'm wanting to say 10, 15 years, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, okay.
I think one of the big things that is different about the Australian model, and if you look at the German model, the Netherlands model, so these are the countries where there's strong long-term care systems. All the countries with strong long-term care systems have something in common, and that long-term care is handled at there's a strong national policy, right? That it's something, it's not delegated down to the level of the states or the municipalities. There's a national policy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And and I think you see that in every country, that if things are come down to the state level, there's always like for a temptation for a state to say, well, you know what, maybe if we don't have generous policies, old people won't move here, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So to get a good policy, you need to have a national policy, and that was what really happened in the Australian case. There was a deep-seated dissatisfaction with their current system, and that all the states in Australia got together and said, okay, we agree that we're going to have a national system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they got to where they are.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the challenge is practical, political.
Sure. Is Canada moving closer to that? Or
It's again, Canada is in similar in many ways. Well, same and different from us, but I think in Canada we have many of the similar challenges that we know we don't have a national system, and if anything, Canada is becoming more fragmented. So the more things are happening at the provincial level, and more provinces are kind of going their own way. And yeah, I mean, there were some huge challenges during the pandemic
mm-hmm.
with long-term care in Canada, and wait lists are long here. There is no country that has really nailed this.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I want to go it.
Yeah.
It's frightening. People don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
Politicians don't want to think about it. It's scary.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great expose, Francis. I think that's great, the insight that you share here. I can see you can make an argument for both sides. You want the national system, and if it's provincial, it's fragmented. And if it's the states would say, oh yeah, we should be allowed to create our own laws here, and kind of like our immigration. I mean, there's the federal laws, and there's the states are butting heads against the feds for the immigration laws, and they want to be able to protect their own states. And the feds are saying, no, it can't be different from one state to another.
Mm-hmm. So we have that too.
Yeah. I think that, maybe it may apply to the same thing with long-term care and sharing the risk here. So, that's a thorny problem, thorny issue.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, it is scary. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I can see where families would not, here in the U.S., it would be very new. It's kind of the nationalizing the healthcare. Families would not be so in favor of putting up a 20% value of their home to cover their long-term care costs. That seems so anathema to our way of thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. But, people are because long-term care is not covered through Medicare. It's only through Medicaid. In most states, it's only through the Medicaid.
Right.
People do have to run down their assets. I mean, California's got rid of a lot of the asset tests, and other states are following suit. But any income that you have, any income that you have goes to pay for these costs. So, I mean, in the U.S. system historically has been one of the ones that's put the most responsibility on individual families, that, if you have any resources at all, you have to pay.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So it's, it's like, okay, how do you share that?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Any other solutions or innovations that you're aware of? Anything else on the horizon?
Well, I think one of the big things that a lot of places are really struggling with is, how do you strike the balance between home care and institutional care? I think most people would rather be at home than in an institution. And, if and there is there is potentially possibilities for saving costs if, people can be cared for in a less expensive way at home than an institution. So how do we kind of, when we're thinking about the practicalities, when we're thinking about, okay, how do we support people as they go through this journey? How much do we pay for home care? How much do we pay for institutional care? Right? And how much what supports are available in those two settings? And that's, I think, something that's a real struggle.
Yeah. Are you seeing any trends? Are you seeing, is it trending more toward institutional kind of
well, it's one of those things that it kind of goes back and forth, right? I think home care is always very popular in theory, right? People say, yeah, this is what I want. I want to be cared for in my own home. But it's hard to do, right? So, the thing is, okay, so just in practicalities, if you're trying to provide care in the home, there's transportation costs. Like, somebody's got to get to the home and back. And if you're living in a rural area, is somebody going to have a car to come to your home? Right? And that's a big practical challenge with providing home care. Again, it's like with these things, it's a lot about just having the resources. And if you need to pay for somebody to drive to your home and back again, it's more. And I think when you think about, government policy, and you think, I think there's always like this question of, why can't we have nice things? Right? And having care in the home as you get old is a nice thing.
Yes.
So why can't we have nice things? Right? And I think one reason is that it costs a lot. Right? But then it costs a lot to have somebody in an institution as well. So, maybe there's some room there.
Sure.
I think one of the, why can't, if you're thinking about why can't we have nice things, one of the challenges is the fear that these services will be abused. Okay. So if we have home care available to help with meal preparation, to help with housework, to help with laundry, if those kinds of services are available, then everybody will want them.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not sure. That doesn't seem like a good reason why we can't have nice things, but I think it's like, if we have nice things, everybody will want nice things. So we can't have nice things. So I think that's the challenge, that I think that there's a fear that if if governments provide assistance, families will step down, and families won't provide the care. I'm not sure that that's accurate. And even so, I think it's pretty harsh to, there's a limit to the amount of sacrifices we can expect people to make. Um, but I think this is the big challenge.
Yeah.
Like, how do we strike this balance between care in the home and institutional care? How do we make care in the home affordable? How do we, how do we solve these problems that
Mm-hmm.
prevent
Yeah.
us from having nice
Yeah.
things?
Yeah. No, that's the other side of this. If we can provide a suitable level of assistance in the home, then people who can't afford to pay may not want to pay as much if the other people are not paying as much. You're right. I mean, it
Yeah,
can be individualized and customized, but then
yeah,
everybody should be entitled to it, and that's
yeah.
yeah.
If a bit of help with, grocery shopping and food preparation is enough to allow you to stay in your home and out of an institution,
Mm-hmm.
that's a great deal for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's like,
Yeah.
how do we do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do we provide people with those supports?
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's other things about it too. I mean, there's like there's sorry, did you have a question? Were you
No,
going
go
to
ahead.
ask me a question? Or,
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
uh,
Yeah.
and I think there's also questions about how we can support family. And one thing that, say, the German system allows, because the German system is very interesting, it's like a model for other countries, is with Germany, there's much more, okay, we're going to give you an allowance and you can use that for home care or you can use that for a nursing home or institutional care.
Mm.
Okay. So there's more like, we're going to trust you, we're going to give you some money and we're going to allow you to spend it. But one thing that the German model does, which is super interesting, is they allow people to pay family for providing care,
Say
right?
that. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you could pay your
Oh,
daughter,
oh,
you could pay your
okay.
son,
Okay. Yeah.
right? So if the choice is like, if your son or your daughter says, you say like, come and look after, like, no, I have to have a job so that I can feed my kids. It's like, okay, you know what? We've got this money that's coming in from the government. We can use that and we get to choose how to spend it. We can use that to pay for you to come and support me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And again, it's like, wouldn't that, can you imagine what a game changer that would be for so many families?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Well, families can get paid now, can't they, for some of the support in home? Isn't that IHHS system? Maybe you're not so familiar with it.
No, I should,
Yeah.
I'm a Canadian, right? So I
Yeah.
don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you give me, can we just like pause for a second and
Oh,
stop
sure.
okay. So,
Okay. So as you mentioned that model in Germany where people can be paid to provide care for the needy family members, parents or siblings or adult children. I think we have some version of that, at least here in California, in home support services. So it's probably close, maybe not as well developed or as expansive as the German model, but you probably are familiar with some of that here. Maybe there's a few states, I guess, that have that.
yeah, I mean, California is so interesting because it is a model for in so many policy areas. And this is exactly the kind of the IHSS that you mentioned. Sorry, just a
Mm-hmm.
second.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
The IHSS that you mentioned is exactly the kind of service that I'm talking about, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
potentially a game changer for families. But there are not many states
Yeah.
in the US where that's available, and in Canada there are very few provinces that have something like that available.
Yeah. Well, I think our systems, unfortunately, are just not keeping up with the growing population and the demands. I mean, one thing I like to think of is people staying healthy longer,
Yeah.
living healthier lives, kind of improving lifestyles. So some of that dependency doesn't occur until very, very late. But,
Yeah.
like I said, everyone knows that some of these things we do not have control over. So
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
recognize the need is there. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we all want to fall off a cliff, right?
Yeah.
Just go
Yeah.
healthy,
Yeah.
healthy, healthy, and then
Yeah.
boom.
Yeah.
And let's just, we can work on the healthy, healthy, healthy bit anyway.
That's right. The cliff comes at some point.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, that's right. So thanks very much. Any takeaways, any final takeaways? What would you hope our audience remembers from this conversation?
I would say talk about it. Talk about it with your family. Think about it and prepare.
Hmm.
The odds are something like 70% of adults who survive to 65 in the United States will at some point need some kind of long-term care. So odds are this is coming for you. Okay, so plan for it and talk to your family and think about what those expectations are and find out what the services are. I would say one of the biggest things in Canada and certainly in my country, I would suspect from the reading I've done in your country as well, one of the biggest myths is people think, well, when I'm old and I need help, when I'm, if I have, one of these, things that happens when you get very old, it will be covered by Medicare, and it's not. So inform yourself about what's out there and talk to your family. And if you're not happy with the system, there's other systems about, and use your time to be politically active and lobby for change.
For sure. Well, that's great advice. Talk about it, plan, learn what services are available, what your expectations are. That's great. Yeah. So looks like we're out of time for today, Frances. But before I wrap up, I just want to remind our listeners to visit my website, livingto100.club, sign up for my email list, and download a free copy of my 9 tips to make living longer enjoyable. And if you are affiliated with a senior living setting, be sure to look for my new training manual and activity guide, Better, Longer, and Happier. Frances, thanks so much for being a guest on our show today. For those who might want to contact you, how can they do that?
Well, just have to spell my name, FranceSWOOLLEY. Google me, I'll come right up. I'm the top hit.
Great.
Oh, well, I think there is somebody else, but if it's like an architecture or it's an artist or something, it's like an economist in Canada, that's me.
Okay.
So just Google me, you can get my hit. You can get all my contact info.
Terrific. Well, again, thanks so much, and thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. Hope to see you next time.
Okay. Thanks so much, Joe.
You're welcome. You're most welcome.